This book made me so angry I made a YouTube channel. At Dark I Become Loathsome by Eric LaRocca. When I was reading this, I considered 4 or 5 times just giving up. I kept checking reviews, and there were so many people just shilling this book, talking about how heart-wrenching it was, and how beautiful the prose was, and how depraved and sickening it was. Reviews were about as purple as the prose in the book. I am not impressed, and I question the taste of the people reviewing it. That said, I'm not even saying that I have good taste, but Paul Tremblay, who wrote Cabin at the End of the World, which was going to be my worst read of last year, has a blurb on the cover of this book saying that it was LaRocca's best one yet. Bruh. So naturally, I had to read this one. It was cringy, full of plot holes. It was so whiny. The best parts were completely inconsequential and just got pushed aside for absolute nonsense. Rest assured, we will be getting into the rest of the details soon. However, before we get started, if you're new here, which you are because this is the only video I've put out yet, my name is Ambrose and welcome to Castle Guy TV, where you can expect media commentary and bitchy book reviews that are made both to entertain you and to make us both more conscientious readers and writers.
That sign can't stop me because I can't read.
And so, I've picked up my worst read of 2025 and did this torturous deep dive so you don't have to. As a precaution, this is a horror novel, so the trigger warning list is pretty long. If you decide to keep watching, you've been advised. Our content warning grocery list includes attempted suicide, animal abuse, cancer/terminal illness, extreme nihilism, grooming, internalized homophobia, murder, pedophilia, sexual assault, unethical kinks that are neither safe, sane, nor consensual, and also potentially offensive, suicidal ideation, and the most 3-edgy 5U wallowing I've read since middle school. Now, I do want to acknowledge that even though I hated this book, it does have its reader, and the reviews show that. There are some people who really connected with this book, which I don't know how, but no matter how bitchy this review gets, this is not meant to be, nor do I endorse any personal attacks on Eric LaRocca, any of the people involved in the publication process of this book, or anyone, however misguided I might view them, liked this book. I invite everyone who has any thoughts they'd like to share to sound off in the comments. If you just want to say hi, that's cool too. This is where I remind you to 1. Like the video, 2. Hype the video if YouTube lets you, and 3. Subscribe, otherwise my cats will find you. One has really stinky breath and the other one farts when he gets stressed out. You've been warned. It's for the greater good. And now, author background. Eric LaRocca, pronouns are he, they, has won 2 Splatterpunk awards and has been nominated for a number of other horror awards. They're generally considered to be one of the poster children for up-and-coming queer horror authors, which makes me concerned that the bar might be that low. This book was published in January of 2025 as LaRocca's debut novel. However, LaRocca has published a number of novellas and short story collections in the same genre, and 9 months later released another novel that's part of a trilogy. Needless to say, this is an established horror author, and we can hold them up to a higher standard than we would someone just entering the scene. So let's crack open the book. As you can see, I have marked this thing up, and not for good reasons. I annotated this and got about halfway through before I got pissed off on the behalf of my highlighters, so sorry. Our dust jacket flap reads, "If you're reading this, you've likely thought that the world would be a better place without you." Single line of text glowing in the darkness of the internet, written by Ashley Luton, who has often thought the same, and worse, in the years since his wife died and his young son disappeared. But the peace of the grave is not for him. It's for those he can help. Ashley has constructed a peculiar ritual for those whose desire to die is at war with their yearning to live a better life. Struggling to overcome his own endless grief, one night Ashley finds connection with Jinx, a potential candidate for Ashley's next ritual, who spins a tale both revolting and fascinating. Thus begins a relationship that traps the two men in an ever-tightening spiral of painful revelations, where long-hidden secrets are dragged kicking and screaming into the light. Only through pain can we find healing, only through death can we find new life. I have my thoughts on if this is an accurate primer, but you'll see for yourself later. So, Ashley Luton is a 43-year-old quote unquote self loathing bisexual man who, after his wife dies, gets balls deep into body modification. He gets horn implants, he gets his ears pointed, and a bunch of other stuff. Dude looks like the guy in Germany with the world record for most piercings. However, this isn't really plot relevant. We only hear about it when Ashley calls himself grotesque. The sad boy trauma doesn't stop there though, because not long after his 8-year-old son overhears him calling him the bad word for gay behind his back, Ashley does the stupidest thing possible and leaves his son alone outside at night to go get his credit card that he misplaced while they were out at the grocery store. Dude comes back outside, there's groceries everywhere, kiddo's gone. It's been 2 years since then. To cope and apparently pay his bills, Ashley creates a ritual to help suicidal people change their outlook on life. It's this mock burial. They make a fake last will and testament. They take this like sponge bath and get in a fancy robe. They can opt in to an oxygen mask, and then they're buried alive for 30 minutes before being dug back out. There's this like weird aftercare process, and afterward they're supposed to be completely changed. And at the end, when they part ways, Ashley says happy birthday. Mind you, this is all run through anonymous forums that somehow are magically local enough that he's easily sourcing multiple clients. Personally, I think that he should have taken the life insurance I'm assuming he got out of this and taken out some loans if he needed to go back to school and become a therapist. But then we wouldn't have this nightmare of a book. And here we are. We get snippets here and there of this apparent manuscript that lists out all the details of this ritual and how to run it, with the implication that this is getting like passed down, but they don't add any new information, or at least new information that matters, and they just interrupt the flow of the scenes, so we're really not going to get into them. As far as structure goes, you could say that this book is marked by the 3 burials that are contained in it. The first one is a young woman, the second one is an old woman, and the third one is Jinx. So the first 2 chapters detail the burial of the young woman. She doesn't get a name or anything, and honestly, I don't find this scene to be particularly important. This burial goes on as normal. It's not his first one. Nothing interesting happens. All we get is a lot of like melodramatic moping in which Ashley explains to us that he becomes a different person at night. Because at dark, he becomes loathsome. I'm not even joking, he just says it. He then comes home to his house, which is about 1 World of Warcraft stream away from becoming Asmongold's apartment. And then he's visited by the apparition of his quote-unquote beloved wife, Pema, Tenzin's wife from the Legend of Korra. More on that in a bit. First, Jinx, kind of. While Ashley is home, he gets a phone call. There's this young man's voice, and he sounds distressed, and he's asking for help, but then hangs up. This dude's voice really gets our beloved pincushion going, which is a very bad thing because Ashley is a widower, and obviously him experiencing any form of attraction is a betrayal, or engaging in capital A, capital T alone time. But this quickly gets derailed because we find out that most of this really is about internalized homophobia. So we go back to Pema. She's a ghost? Hallucination? I don't know. And she pokes at Ashley's inability to cook, then also his ability to touch grass and touch ass. And she alludes to the whole Bailey plus bad word for gay situation. And this is where we actually get told about the incident. Bailey, the son, tells Ashley that he overheard Ashley saying that he was the bad word for gay, while he's also telling Ashley that he was being bullied by some kids in the neighborhood because he was playing dress up with his mom's wedding dress. After this night, Ashley gets visited in the morning by the detective in charge of Bailey's case, Detective Claude. She brings Ashley what appears to be Bailey's hat from when he was kidnapped, and says that the scene had enough blood that there was no chance in hell that whoever it was still alive. He's 100% dead, but Ashley isn't convinced. Don't get me wrong, ACAB, but also 48 hours. It's been 2 years, dude. So naturally, Ashley isn't doing too hot with that news. He decides that he will become decidedly more loathsome in the daytime, too. You know, something truly monstrous. Then we get this chat log between Jinx and Ashley as they're trying to nail down the details for this burial. This is where we open up to one of two of our major side quest stories. However, before we get into that, this is the part of the book where I just started rolling around laughing in bed while I was recovering from surgery, and I still had like a tube in my stomach. So I was laughing my ass off and it hurt. Because get this. This is an anonymous chat log, right? His username was sad_boy. You've gotta be fucking kidding me, man. This is a 43-year-old man with a dead wife and child, and his username is sad boy. How am I supposed to take this shit seriously, dude? So they set this date and time for the burial, and then Jinx is like, but I'm still lonely. Please stay and talk. And so we get this beautiful interaction. Jinx asks Ashley what he's thinking about, and Ashley says, I was thinking how if the sun exploded, we wouldn't know for 8 minutes. Of course, that's not a very long time, but what if we knew? What if we somehow knew and we were forced to live in agony for those 8 minutes? Master Jinx 76 says this, the sun could explode and I wouldn't care. Why is that? My life is a concrete box. Come on, dude. These are grown-ass men, grown-ass adults. I have seen plenty of man-children in my life, and this is something else. So after that beautiful interaction, Jinx offers to tell Ashley a story about quote-unquote a man who makes a deal with another man. Now, mind you, this is entirely formatted as chat logs. Ashley never replies. We get this bullshit excuse that it was how he was showing that he was listening. I don't buy it. I think that Loraka didn't have any ideas for how he could participate in this story. So anyway, this story takes place in Henley's Edge, which is where Ashley lives. And Henley's Edge is a village. To give you a picture of how small that is, the high school I graduated from had a student body of 2,000, not including any faculty. My graduating class was 600, 1,000 people. 1,000 people max. And our setting in Henley's Edge is this like gay sex dungeon brothel sort of situation. One, it's called the Playpen, which is just the most heavy-handed nonsense I have ever heard. And they do some like hella illegal shit and somehow fly under the radar. Like, this is a small town. People talk. People snoop. What the fuck? The story centers around this guy named Keen, who, when he was younger, had this turbo meth habit that took all of his teeth. The owner of the Playpen is this guy named Dubois, who propositions Keen because one of his clients has specifically requested Keen for his quote-unquote services. Except he's not one of the sex workers there. He's actually just a frequent flyer, but this guy has been requested because our new client really likes people with no teeth. Which, like, go off, I guess. However, it isn't just getting serviced. So our client's name is Cavalier, and Dubois wants this piece of jewelry that is affixed to this guy's nether regions called the Emerald Centipede. Apparently it's worth buku bucks. And so he wants Keen to pretend to be a minor, provide services, and then drop the news that he's underage right afterward, then ask for the centipede as hush money. And it works. Cavalier is waiting there with a bottle of wine in one of the cells, and they do their business, and he reveals that he's underage. Cavalier gives him the jewel, but then at the very end, all too convenient, in my opinion, Keen bends down to pick up the underwear that Cavalier is about to leave behind because he's hightailing it before he gets the cops called on him. In that moment, Keen just miraculously drops his wallet, and Cavalier grabs it, looks at his driver's license, and sees where this guy is actually 23. He realizes he's been had, and they duke it out. So Cavalier's trying to kill Keen, and Keen grabs the corkscrew that was with the wine bottle that Cavalier had when he came in, and manages not only to irreparably damage the nether regions of Cavalier, but he also manages to fatally stab this corkscrew through the guy's head. I would have bought it if it was the wine bottle cracked over his head, because cracking a glass bottle over someone's head is actually really, really dangerous, but I guess this will do. And then afterward, Keen is shouting at the PA in this cell, being like, hey, let me out. I got the thing. Also, he's dead. Am I in trouble? Dubois goes on and he's like, let you out? Why would I do that? I just made like hella bank off of this live stream full of like private viewers who just watched this whole thing unfold. I don't give a shit about the Emerald Centipede. I made more than that just now. You're my next star. Keen is basically trapped there and used for the entertainment of these private viewers that are watching this live stream. And he doesn't have anywhere to use the bathroom. The body is still there. So we end the story with him like cannibalizing the body of Cavalier and having shit in a corner. Pretty gruesome. That's it. That's where we end the story. Then the story gets Ashley excited again. And he goes on this melodramatic speech after we read the world's most awkward description of alone time, in which he talks about how Jinx, who he's never met, has awoken something locked away deep inside of him. And he says that Jinx is quote unquote godlike and capable of many wondrous things. Jesus Christ, take a cold shower. And then we get to burial number 2, which is the old woman. This whole sequence was like 2 or 3 chapters and dragged on forever. So we'll kind of glaze over this one. There's a couple things we'll come back to, but they aren't so much events as they are me bitching about stuff. So on the way to this burial, Ashley is thinking about how, as we've said before, he's decided that he is going to become decidedly more loathsome in the daytime because he's never going to reunite with his wife or his son. Nothing matters. Life is meaningless. But more important, he's come to the realization that he's found his higher calling. He doesn't just want to do these rituals to help suicidal people choose to live. He wants to free them from the suffering of being alive, so he's going to kill them. So he set his sights on burying this old woman alive. And that's about as interesting as it gets. Nothing new happens. Nothing challenges him to not do it. Everything happens as labeled. And then when he gets home, Bailey and Pema's apparitions are there, and they're criticizing him about murdering, because, you know, murdering is bad. And honestly, that's about it. Then the next day, we get to see the singular instance of Ashley experiencing any consequences or challenges to his actions. He realizes that Jinx's burial is the following day, and he doesn't have a casket anymore because the old woman who got buried alive is in the one that he had. Then he goes to Norman Restorick of Restorick and Sons funeral home. They say the full name in one chapter about like 2 or 3 times. It's honestly kind of funny. So this guy, Norman, he's like one step away from either retiring or dying. He's in his 80s, and the one who arranged Pema's. So they're kind of tight. Except, this is where I really started to lose any suspension of disbelief, because our guy, who apparently isn't paying his bills, getting last notice notifications in his mail, who's apparently surviving on these rituals, goes up to this guy and is trying to buy another casket, which caskets minimum start at like $2,000 and can cap at much higher than that. So I have no idea how this motherfucker is trying to pay for this shit. Rather than see Ashley struggle for money, Norman, after getting a whole sob story from Ashley, is going to give it to him, but Ashley's being really dodgy about saying what the casket is for. And Norman's like, I'm not going to give it to you unless you tell me. We get this like really half-baked excuse that's partially true, which, okay, whatever. And he just gets a free casket. Also, he heavily reiterates that, oh yeah, it's totally fine if it's an adult casket. That'll work just fine, whatever. And then we get to the burial of Jinx, which is on Bailey's birthday. Somewhere in between this, we get some more apparition stuff. Ashley decides in the middle of all of this that he's going to make a suicide attempt again by locking all of the doors in his garage and turning his car on. But it stops because Bailey appears and tells him that he still hasn't found him yet. And this is what drives him to keep going, I guess. And then between now and this final burial, we get the second and final side quest story, which is the story of Victor and Tandy. Earlier on in the book, there's a 2-paragraph snippet of Ashley explaining how he religiously followed this blog by this guy describing his experiences with his husband dying of colon cancer. And this is the actual story. Buckle up. I'm not going to paint you a very vivid picture of what's going on with Victor and Tandy. Victor is dying of colon cancer. Yippee. Tandy realizes that he has a thing for the cancer, not his husband. He is very excited by the idea of, during certain acts, feeling the cancer in certain places while they're boinking. And so he's really into this, and he's not obviously telling his husband. So they are going at it like rabbits while Victor is very clearly declining in health. He convinces Victor not to get life-saving surgery under the guise of it being that he's afraid that surgery will change him. And we get this excuse that Victor is like very weak-willed and just kind of does whatever Tandy says. But then finally, Victor is like really, really close to dying, and Tandy finally is like, okay, yeah, you should get the surgery. But then everything's awful because it isn't that the surgery changed Victor, it changed Tandy because his thing for malignant cells isn't being entertained anymore. So he becomes completely disinterested with Victor and they separate. And then at the end, apparently they reunite one day and Tandy decides to just say to him that he loved his cancer more than he loved Victor. I don't know what compelled him to just say that because that's really awful, but here we are. And then, of course, we get yet another melodramatic speech from Ashley in which he says, and I quote, "Like Tandy, I'm content to remain a vile, hideous thing, and I curse all those who wish to pluck the black root of cancer from inside me. At dark, I become loathsome." Again, he cannot stop saying it over and over and over again. And now, the final hour, it's Jinx time. As I said before, what conveniently would have been Bailey's 10th birthday. After this long, horribly purple description about how Jinx is so charming and youthful and muscular, and there's something beguiling, something bewitching about him. He's so masculine and everything that Ashley's father would have wanted because he was never masculine enough and blah, 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 yada, yada, daddy issues. Cut me a fucking break. Finally get to the burial prep. This like twang is annoying, but he's also kind of funny. He pokes holes in everything that Ashley is saying about the burial ritual and is accusing it of being a scam just to get dick, points out how sketchy it is, and is like, you know, it was insane that anyone would even agree to doing this. But then he also really drinking the Kool-Aid, talking about how desperate he is to be changed and he wants to be reborn, brother. And at one point, Jinx challenges Ashley because he doubts that he's serious about the ritual and has him swallow a marble. There's a lot of parts where there's sexual tension. They do the sponge bath and Jinx gets excited. There's also more inconsequential side questing, not side quest stories, where they're just doing more stuff that doesn't add any tension or anything. So we get these like heart-to-hearts between Ashley and Jinx where they're like talking about Ashley's internalized homophobia and about Bailey. It's all done under this pretense of, I don't know why I'm telling him all of this stuff because I'm really not supposed to be disclosing personal information to clients, but so hot. I'm just innately drawn to him. I don't know. There's something about him. So then we get to the last will and testament, which we don't actually because Jinx is like, no, I'm not going to do that. So Ashley and him write letters to people that they would have written something to if they were dying, like their last words to them ever. Jinx tells the story about how he would write a letter to the dog that he used to have as a kid. Ashley is talking about writing a letter to the man he almost cheated with when his wife was getting chemotherapy, but they don't actually write the letters, they just talk about it. All of this just doesn't feel natural. It definitely feels like when you read like one of those poorly hacked together romances that say that they're enemies to lovers, but their version of enemies to lovers is that they disagree on what is the correct topping on pizza. And then after one disagreement, they're suddenly drawn to each other with no chemistry and start boinking. It's so cheap. Throughout this entire sequence, anytime Jinx is saying anything that would even sniff at our big reveal, he is giving us the most heavy-handed cues possible. Like, dude is fucking grinning. He is cheesing at any possible opportunity to hint at what's going on, as if we're too dumb to figure it out ourselves. He hands him this drawing that is very obviously a child's scribble. Ashley, in all of his wisdom, is like, this looks like the work of an amateur surrealist. Shut the fuck up. Holy shit. It's very obviously a child's drawing, and Jinx says that he didn't draw it, someone else did, and that he titled it an anatomically incorrect angel, but not the person who drew it. But that, that'll be important for later when he comes out of the casket. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So ridiculous. 2 seconds later, Jinx is about to be buried, but right as the casket lid closes, he's like, wait, I knew Bailey. Yeah, we know, in the biblical sense. This part felt so stupid because Ashley continues burying Jinx and then is like, wait a minute, no, I have to know what's going on, and then digs him back up. Why not just have him immediately react and be like, hey, what the fuck? I want answers now. But instead we get this little tangent about him burying him and unburying him for no reason. Like, what was the payoff there? So anyway, he gets dug back up, and I'm going a little bit out of order, but we find out that Jinx kidnapped Bailey, kept him in a windowless room, physically and sexually abused him before killing him. Now, this is not an endorsement of murder, but I have absolutely no clue how Ashley didn't just kill this guy. He can murder an innocent woman, but he cannot bring himself to murder the man that raped his child. The only reason we're given to believe why he might choose not to kill him is that he's like young and hairless with a big dick and weird kinks. It's so dumb. So Ashley wants answers and is questioning him, and we get these like cartoon villain ass speeches where it's very clear that no matter how much guilt Jinx says that he feels over what happened, he's asking Ashley if he wants to hear about all the details of what he did, and implies that Ashley might like it, but then also that it's horrible and awful and he's suicidal over it. He can't bring himself to kill himself over it. Pick a fucking lane, dude. Pick a fucking lane. Are you proud of it or not? I am more liable to think that he is proud of it. But then in the middle of all of this, Jinx decides to drop that he believes that Bailey was trans. Mind you, we have no reason to believe that Jinx had like groomed Bailey into following him willingly, because there is one, groceries scattered all over where he was kidnapped, which implies a violent capture, but then also we are given no context until the very end, in which he was violently abused and then murdered. We have no reason to believe that Bailey would trust this information with him. But regardless, Jinx tells Ashley that Bailey asked him why God made him a boy instead of a girl. It is also implied that this was a bonus for Jinx, so it's within the realm of possibility in my mind that he's projecting.
It's editing, Ambrose. I just want to note that I'll be using he/him pronouns to describe Bailey in this video. There is no verifiable proof of Bailey's transness being real, and it never uses feminine language to describe him. So I'm only going to use the language that the book and Laraka have given me. I also have some thoughts about how Laraka handled the topic of transness in a child, but we'll get into that later.
So after this little therapy session, Ashley and Jinx throw hands. Ashley randomly has a hammer he conveniently thought to pack in his bag that we're just learning of now, and then he smacks Jinx in the head with it, but he's not dead. Meanwhile, Bailey comes out from wherever and is observing the body. Ashley pulls him aside. He's corporeal now, and hands Bailey the drawing, the angel or whatever, and says she will protect him wherever he goes. And then he sends him off, I guess. We get our final moments between Jinx and Ashley, in which Jinx drops the stupidest reveal out of all of this. But it is very hard for me to audibly react to something. I watch a funny video and I'm dead-faced. I watch something sad. You want tears out of me. You want to see me boo-hoo-hoo, and not happening. I was shouting at this book, like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Why did he write this in? He decides not only is Jinx suicidal, but we can't let him just be suicidal. He has 6 or 7 months to live, because Laraka cannot help himself but throw in another random terminal illness for no fucking reason. So he managed to find Ashley on this anonymous chat forum, hoping that he would seek this guy's services so that way Ashley would kill him for him. But he has no way of knowing that he actually was burying people alive, which I found a little bit hokey. We're supposed to believe that he wants to be killed because he feels ashamed of what he did. But then he also had that whole thing where he's bragging about the stuff that he did to Bailey. And he's talking about abusing an 8-year-old like it's fucking story time. Now, I'm not saying that murder is okay, allegedly. But if I had a child and I knew that someone had tortured, raped, and murdered my child, and I came face to face with the fucker who did it, there would be a pool of blood and none of it would be mine. I firmly believe that as obnoxious and detestable of a narrator Ashley was, killing the pedophile that killed his son, in my opinion, would have made him a far more sympathetic protagonist. Emphasis on pathetic. Instead, Ashley does a cornier version of the ending of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where if Jinx were Ozai, Ashley doesn't take Jinx's firebending away, which in this case would be the nether regions. He just lets him go. He says, not only am I not going to kill you, I don't just wish you 6 or 7 months to live, I wish you 6 or 7 years, so that way you can live with your guilt. The guilt that resulted in him bragging about what he did to Ashley's face and wondering if he would like it. He doesn't go to any measures to keep Jinx from ever hurting any more kids. He doesn't do anything. He just starts walking away. And then when Jinx asks him where he's going, he doesn't say where, but he says that it's almost sunrise and there'll be different people then. You know, because at dark they become loathsome, and Jinx is only a nocturnal pedophile. Then he tells him happy birthday, and he walks off to go to his car. He drives to the gravesite where the old woman is buried because he's suddenly remembered that murder is bad. He digs her up, hoping she's not dead yet, and he cradles her body in the style of the Pietà. There are these two figures that are in the distance heading toward him that he hopes are Pema and Bailey. We'll never know. The sun rises, and we end where we began, at Dark I Become Loathsome. You made it to the end. And now my many, many thoughts. To have good pacing, your story needs to have understandable stakes that have some urgency to them. Otherwise, there's no reason to push the plot along. They don't have to be cataclysmic, they don't have to be life-threatening, they just have to matter. And they have to matter to your reader. Instead, we get a lot of moping. There are whole pages dedicated to Ashley talking about how grotesque he is and how he's an obscene little monster and nobody loves him. We then get these burials where the stakes are removed before anyone even ends up in the ground. The first burial goes without a hitch. We get told before it happens that Ashley's going to bury the woman alive, and he follows through on it with no challenge to it whatsoever. There could have been some saving grace in the internal monologue. There's no tension between what Ashley wants and what's stopping him from getting it. We know early on that things aren't going to work out. He reacts to stuff a little bit later on, but he doesn't make active choices in the moment. Jinx being a mystery doesn't really matter much because Jinx is the one who reaches out every single time. He isn't making any choices to find Jinx. This is just handed to him. Detective Claude tells him that they found Bailey's hat and he's likely dead, and even though he says that he doesn't believe them, that he doesn't believe that they've done enough, he doesn't actually go and try to investigate for himself. When he decides that he's going to start freeing people by killing them, we don't get like a clear reason why he comes to this conclusion other than he decides that life is meaningless. This isn't something that pushes the plot along because we don't have a central narrative between what Ashley wants and how he's going to get it. The only things that really pushed me along was I was trying to figure out what is the plot here. There are plenty of books that pull that off effectively because they have enough of a compelling conflict. That lack of agency becomes part of the point. But we don't really see that here. It's not sophisticated enough of a narration. All of the new information we get is static. It doesn't change anything about what's going to happen. The most we get as far as increasing stakes is when we realize that Ashley needs to get a new casket. But that gets solved in one chapter. The final scene with Jinx had enough pacing to push it along, but part of that was just that I was so fucking ready to get it over with. This book didn't have a core story arc. There are plenty of different story arcs to make this work. We could have seen him go into this full descent into madness. We could have had him coming to terms with his grief and moving on. At the end of the day, this book ended where it began. Okay, murder is bad. He doesn't experience any on-screen consequences for the murder. The guy who murdered his child is still alive and hasn't been taught a real lesson. He doesn't change his relationship to his sexuality. He just sees more context for the consequences of his internalized homophobia. He doesn't actually have to sit with the fact that none of the things he did can be taken back. Even his attempted suicide felt thrown in. I have seen plenty of well-written books use suicidality as part of the plot, and this was not it. I don't know Laraka's experience with mental health, so I'm not going to speculate on that. But what the book communicated to me was a very shallow view of what suicidality looks like. We don't get context for this. The mental health struggle, the wish for death, isn't fully explored. It's just a plot point. With all that in mind, the way that we create compelling stakes is for our characters to make difficult choices. The only difficult choice was, does Ashley tell Norman Restorick a lie about why he needs a coffin and risk being caught doing what he's doing? Or does he not say anything, take his L, and not have a casket for when he goes to bury Jinx? That is the only difficult choice he makes. I wouldn't even argue that choosing not to murder Jinx is a hard choice. We didn't get a good enough build-up for that show of mercy to really resonate. Forgiveness isn't a theme in this book when it could have been. A lot of things could have been themes but aren't given enough time to mature. A difficult choice should not be between a good thing and a bad thing, like choosing not to murder and choosing to murder, because we don't really get the idea that Jinx still being alive bothers him that much. It wasn't a difficult choice for Ashley to kill the old woman because he had already decided it was going to happen. This could have been a story between sanity and madness. It could have been the difference between revenge and mercy, grief versus recovery, between internalized homophobia and self-acceptance. Even though there were things happening in this book, the narrative promises stuff and delivers on it with no question. This isn't a story. We get this poorly pantomimed soliloquy about a sad pincushion, with respect. As a result, the narrative really lost a lot of depth, and the good parts got overshadowed by all of the bad stuff. The next part is character and voice. In the last section, we looked at how choices drive plot. But you don't get difficult choices unless you get believable characters that have choices to make. Choices are decided by their values and the things that matter to them. It also requires situations that are understandable that create the conditions for the choices. I would say that the most grounded of the two would be our situation, which is a guy with internalized homophobia having issues with grief. I cannot say that the characters are grounded. So our list of characters, we have Bailey and Pema who are dead in their apparitions. We have Jinx. We have Detective Claude. We have Norman Restorick of Restorick and Sons Funeral Home. We have Ashley. We can cut out Ashley's family, we can cut out Detective Claude, and we can cut out Norman. All these characters are just plot pieces for pushing the action. I'm also not going to include our side quest characters because that's an insult to our time. And honestly, they're probably the most fleshed out of any of them, which is a very low bar. So that leaves us Jinx and Ashley. Jinx doesn't change. Moreover, throughout the few chapters that he's included, he contradicts himself over and over and over again. We never get a clear picture of his internal reality, nor do we get a good mystery either. He's rather forthcoming in a way where it feels very flat. There's something missing there. There's no consequences for the things that make him a mystery either. All we know is Ashley thinks he's hot, he's an asshole, he's a murderer, he's a pedophile, he's a rapist pedophile, and depending on the page, he's suicidal or eerily proud of what he's done. Oh, and he's sad about his dog. And then when we look at Ashley, Ashley is sexually frustrated, he hates himself, he has internalized homophobia, he has turbo daddy issues.
I was born with glass bones and paper skin. At night, I lie awake in agony until my heart attacks put me to sleep. Oh, no!
He doesn't gain any security or self-acceptance about his queerness as the plot goes on. He doesn't ease or lessen in his suicidality, or if it changes at all, it returns to a stable state within a chapter. Any consequences he would have had for his self-hatred gets completely cut out because we begin with the victim already dead. He doesn't sit and process that he can't take that shit back, nor are there any points in time in which he is challenged because of any of this. The most we get is that he decides murder is okay once, and then he decides it isn't okay when there's a final showdown. In that time, he isn't at risk for being discovered for any of this. Guilt isn't used in a meaningful way. Most of his guilt is the apparitions poking at him for murdering the old woman. I don't know why the apparitions are there. I don't think they add anything. It seems corny. I don't know what LaRocca was thinking because this felt very overly sentimental, cheesy bid for my heartstrings to be pulled. On top of this, the summary that we get in the dust jacket promises a relationship that spirals. They're not even really acquaintances. We get a nasty short story and Ashley having some alone time afterward. And then we get this really poor chemistry. Oh my god, he's hot. I'm going to tell him everything. And trauma dump. Oh wait, he's my trauma. They don't have chemistry. We just get like gender envy, I think. And that could have been explored more, but there's a difference between I can't tell if I want to fuck him or be him and actually having affection for someone. I think that this book would have been better if there had been affection between them. It would be so much more of a betrayal if he found out that this guy that he had genuine feelings for was his son's rapist. Like, they don't even have sex. One of them has alone time about the other one's story, and the other one gets it up, but nothing happens. And I'm not saying that they had to have sex, but I think that that would have actually done something to change the dynamic, and it would have made the big reveal have some weight to it. And then like they have these heart-to-hearts, I guess. We don't get vulnerability. Vulnerability isn't just saying your feelings. It's not just, oh, I decided on my own to say something. It's something pushed me to say this stuff that I've been holding close to my chest, and now I can't take it back. This is a risk I'm taking. If there had been external pressures that made Jinx have to tell the truth, that would have been more compelling than him just blurting it out in the casket. The same thing is true about admitting what happened with Bailey. We find out what happened between Ashley and Bailey really early on. It would be so much more interesting if that had been held on. There's so little depth to how these characters are written, that lack of understanding, I think, has kept this plot from being well crafted, because a well crafted character pushes a plot. And then we get to the voice aspect of this, and this is part and parcel to the lack of development of these characters, because the voice is just really fucking cringy. If you look at what the seriousness of the subject matter is supposed to be, having your main character be this melodramatic and call themselves sad boy and talk about how grotesque he is ad nauseum, there's just this unseriousness to the reading experience where I was genuinely wondering if I was reading satire and just didn't know it. Our narrator is a 43-year-old man and is talking like when I was in middle school and I exclusively listened to this band called Insomnium, who had songs with titles such as Mute is My Sorrow, Shadows of the Dying Sun, In the Groves of Death, and Lay the Ghost to Rest. And I actually still like that band, so don't say shit about them. However, between this and how flat every other character is, this is a masterclass in kill your darlings. Or shove your darling in a locker, or make some better fucking darlings. If you took out half of the filler in this book, it would barely scratch novella length. It needs fucking Ozempic, it needs a bariatric program, it needs liposuction. This book has so much fat to trim off of it that to get rid of the rest after all of that, you'd have to chop it off and cook it with your eggs for breakfast. Because of how poorly crafted these characters were, I had no emotional connection to them whatsoever. Note that emotional connection is not the same as liking or agreeing with them. Writers establish emotional connections that can mean I'm heavily invested in your downfall. I didn't even hate this character so much as I hated the writing. It made the plot boring and a lot of the situations that our characters were in really unconvincing. There were these overt bids for sentimentality that, not to be a heartless asshole, but like, I don't give a shit. Why am I supposed to give a shit about this? Okay, like the last will and testament for the old woman, she says that the only thing she has to give away is her heart. One, that is so like cheesy. This is some like Kingdom Hearts level, your heart is your guiding key cheese.
You're stupid!
But also, like, I don't know this woman. I got like 2 seconds of backstory and that was it. And this is coming from a horror novel. What are we doing here? I'm not uncomfortable. I'm not horrified. I'm not experiencing much suspense. I'm not coming to grips with a common human fear. This is supposed to be psychological. This isn't just a fatal flaw of the writing. It's making me wonder how this got published and also giving me hope because at least I know better than to do this. And speaking of wondering how this got published, I also wondered how this book ever got published whenever I hit one of Laraka's egregious walls of purple prose. Writing beautiful poetic language isn't a sin, and showing versus telling is not only not a sin, but it's a required skill to learn. The problem is when you don't know moderation for either one. Laraka did not take that advice to heart. Your language can't just be pretty for prettiness' sake, sorry Oscar Wilde, and you can't just show every step-by-step detail of everything your character is doing. I don't need to know what kind of stuff your character is doing to bide his time while he's waiting the 30 minutes for this person to be buried alive if it has nothing to do with the plot, if it has nothing to reveal about his character. I don't give a shit. I don't need to have paragraphs about the scenery if the scenery isn't adding anything to what's happening. The way that we achieve a balance is by manipulating the length of our descriptions and the language that we use for the descriptions to bend and break time and to create emphasis that draws the reader's attention somewhere. There are paragraphs full of description that honestly makes no sense. There's levels of sense to make from someone's writing. If someone is going to likely understand an abstract chunk of language, I am that party. That means that a layman is going to be twice as confused reading whatever is on the page. Then we get descriptions like this that I think are just ridiculous. Midnight's breath clings to us as we slowly make our way from the barn and into the field of grass. Weeds and other plants crunch beneath our feet as we march single file down a narrow pathway toward the burial site I've arranged. This part's fine, honestly. Midnight's breath clings to us is a bit ambitious, but we'll keep going. Night's perfume, an intoxicating aroma, bewitching smells that is somehow incapable of disguising the unpleasantness of the task at hand, surrounds us. I imagine an invisible wreath of Twilight's aroma beating on the old woman's skin like glimmering pellets of morning dew, as if nighttime were marking her, the way it seems to mark all who are acolytes of the stars. I tried to give Laraka the benefit of the doubt here, but what the fuck does that mean? My guess was that Acolyte of the Stars was supposed to give this like cosmic imagery for someone who's seeking death, but one that feels overly sentimental and romanticizing being suicidal. But that's really a stretch. I don't think that your average reader is going to make that stretch. And also, like, this is very much of like Reddit atheist character who then later kind of treats death in this like spiritual, reverent, but also very much edgelord 13-year-old way. An acolyte, it is very rare that you see that word outside a religious context. So in general, I just don't want to give this guy any credit because it's nonsense. And it took me out of what was happening. It was already a poorly paced sequence. It's not this evocative metaphor that emphasizes the importance of some story beat. It's just Laraka playing toys with pretty words, thus suffering at the hands of it. And to make matters worse, I don't want to say it's laziness, but Laraka's prose is very coddled. And when I say that, what I mean is going back to the same tricks over and over and over again. So that tells me that either he has had no interest in challenging his prose, or that he's had some very bad workshop partners who have not challenged him. Plenty of people have their writing quirks. That happens all the time. I have my writing quirks. But it was to a point that was the reason that I gave up annotating, because I was going to annotate how many times he said 3 synonymous adjectives at once to describe a thing, or used couching language like something bewitching, something beguiling, over and over and over again without describing what the something was, and how many times he used at Dark I Become Loathsome, 32 times by the way I counted, as a fake anaphora. The book might have been in part written with AI because those were also some telling habits of large language models when being fed prompts to describe something. And that's a very like heavy accusation to make of a writer, especially one who's considered very prolific in his genre. So I'm not going to say that it was AI, but what I can say is that if a large language model is falling back to those language patterns and using that to describe things, that means that that is a common form of laziness in other people's writing that's being fed into these language models. It is so repetitive because it's comfortable. This book was not edited to a degree I found satisfactory. There were times where the whole like 3 synonymous adjectives thing was happening so often I was highlighting it more than once on one page, which is ridiculous. It's distracting and it doesn't do anything. If you're going to say there was something blah 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 or something blah 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 about whatever, one, if you aren't going to take that broken rule and bend it in a way that like makes it new and engaging for the reader, or use that vagueness as some other device, either you need to go back to the drawing board or that description wasn't necessary. You are going to have more success with what you don't say than what you say outright. There were some other things that were repetitive that are definitely just personal to Laraka. Overused words like twilight, loathsome, monstrous, bewitching, beloved, beguiling, and also, for whatever reason, he really liked to describe things as the size of a quail egg. The weakness of Laraka's prose really shows its ass when you look at the title. As I said, it repeated 32 times as a non sequitur. What I believe he was trying to do was a like large scale anaphora. The poster child example of that being pulled off is in Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, when the phrase "so it goes" is used like every single time something horrible happens. And sometimes it's humorous, sometimes it's just complete nihilism. It's meant to gain new meaning or acquire more meaning as it repeats over time throughout the book, and the reader has to place meaning onto it. It's about, the absurdity of violence, being desensitized to violence, the inevitability of death, and the despair of having to kind of laugh until you cry about it. And it does that in a way that looks effortless. The anaphora that LaRocca tried to do was not so elegant, which is to say that using it as a non sequitur when it's already the title and there's not a lot of interpretation for it, it's very to the point. You become loathsome at dark. There's no change over time. Also, there wasn't change in the novel. It just becomes this weird little stomach pain you forget about, and then it comes back, and it's like, okay, we pack this up. Can I throw up or take a shit or whatever and get this over with? Next is genre conventions. The other most novice mistake on this book is that I was sold that this was going to be a horror novel. It says so in the front matter, and I do scorn the notion that every single book has to follow as many genre conventions as possible. This was not a horror novel. It barely fits under a thriller. It wasn't thrilling. Instead, I had to sit down and ask myself, what were the expectations I had for this book as a reader and what expectations it set up? Horror plays upon common, mostly universal fears. It uses those fears as the driving force of whatever situation is being set up. If there's a big bad beastie or haunted location is often symbolic of whatever it's trying to make commentary on. Not every horror piece has to have a beastie or a location. A lot of that stems from the Gothic. However, there isn't any horror. There's like shock value kink stuff, but it's poorly executed. And I don't have evidence to prove or disprove this claim, but I am not convinced that LaRocca set out to write a book that was about kink gone wrong. I'm not having any of my fears played upon. I just spent most of my time being upset at how poorly written this was. If horror isn't going to play upon fear, it's going to play upon discomfort, disgust. It's going to take the mundane and tell you that it isn't safe anymore. And everything is either already unsafe or just unconvincing. To do good horror, you have to master pace. Where I think LaRocca got things wrong is that, these are depraved individuals doing depraved things, but he didn't pay close enough attention to the differences between a thriller or an episode of Law and Order SVU or an actual horror piece for any of that to matter, especially with how cringy and laughable his protagonist was. There was a clear misunderstanding of tone. At my most generous, I would say that this could be a psychological thriller or a psychological drama. Usually when I think of just good, solid horror, I think of Midnight Mass, because they take the mundane of this small town and this Catholic congregation. They take the comfort and stability of ritual, and it gets turned on its head because all the townspeople are doing what scary small town people do. Tensions are rising because of the spooky priest that shows up. Fear of the unknown is almost always in horror. In any piece of fiction, but especially horror, there will be an interplay between base needs and what is not meeting them. If a horror piece is driven by the difference between connection with others and disconnection with others, there will still be life or death stakes. Midsummer is a perfect example because our main character feels alienated. She's grieving her family. Her boyfriend fucking sucks. And she's creating this connection with people in this cult that very clearly are unsafe for her, but we can't place why yet. And we see her vulnerability taken advantage of. But the core driver of the tension is that understood life or death state because of the genre. We know that someone's going to get got, and we don't know when. It's just a matter of when the other shoe is going to drop. We don't get that. Instead, we get this self-centered nincompoop who gets a savior complex after having this encounter with great grief, but he's very immature. He has a very limited worldview. He has this melodrama that makes him unbelievable. He isn't a full person. We don't really see what his day-to-day outside of the arranging of the burials. He has no connections with other people. All we get is him feeling alienated and saying so, but we don't see him being alienated. We have no reason to feel dread for him. We have no reason to feel dread from others. You have a lot of different axes that this could have been horror through: the internalized homophobia, the issue with the son being dead. There's so many options that could have been taken that weren't. So we get this very flat story. But then I was kind of thinking, if I were to place this in a genre, what genre would it be? Honestly, when I was reading this, I felt like I was watching the same aimless wandering and disillusionment as in The Catcher in the Rye, which, if you haven't read, is what we call a Bildungsroman or a coming-of-age story. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, sometimes Bildungsroman is specifically about schooling. I personally use them interchangeably. You have a character that is in a state of innocence or limited worldview who is compelled to go on some sort of quest that removes them from that source of security. They face new challenges, and eventually you come to this point of maturation. They have to grieve the things they have to let go of that they held on to desperately as children, and in losing that innocence, either come into adulthood or get closer to it. Obviously, we are talking about a 43-year-old man. This is not a child. That is part of why I'm not wanting to say with my full chest that this is a coming-of-age story, because he doesn't come of age. He does pretty much stay how he was. What we do see is, even though he's not young and naive because he's a boy, he's young in that he hasn't fully accepted his sexuality, and in some ways is kind of like a baby gay. He has this limited worldview about himself and his relation to others, and about life and death, and what everything means, and how he's processing his grieving. He is very childish in a lot of respects. And he doesn't really get a good inciting incident for him to have the journey aspect where he faces these new challenges. The only new challenge he gets is his sexual desire for Jinx. It falls along the lines of a Bildungsroman far more than it does a horror novel, because the loss of innocence is a number of things, but the one that sticks on the page is him realizing that he can't free people by killing them. He can't just murder. He's not going to save anybody. And that could have been a very powerful realization, because at the end of the day, this is a story not about grief, but a story about control. This person has lost all control of his life and is creating rituals to give him a sense of peace. And it's not working. Things aren't in his control, and he's acting out. He thinks that life is meaningless because he's out of control of his own life, but he also hasn't had the maturity to know what the next steps are, pushes people away instead of seeking community. He doesn't fight to change anything. He doesn't go and try to investigate his son's death. He just stagnates. At the very least, we get the new development thinking murder is okay, and then we get that undone when he realizes, oh, maybe I'm wrong. That is about as much as I can say as far as his character growth, but I think that that is a better example than horror. No matter what genre this is, it is poorly executed, so take my comparison with a grain of salt, because I don't think this is going to fully fit anywhere. It's not done in a sophisticated manner where we could say that it's genre bending. Getting into our next section, speaking of a lack of sophistication, there is a persistent, crusty, moldy-ass trope in the horror genre in which sexual violence is used as a plot point in a way that is exploitative. I would say that this book does that, but the only reason why no one's been throwing around that particular statement is that all of the victims were men. That's not to say that people are okay with this when it's men, but oftentimes this has been specifically a commentary about misogyny, and therefore we're looking at women. That is an undeniable fact. There's a way to use that subject matter in a story in a way that's respectful. Both of our side quest stories are stories of sexual violence. We have a guy who is essentially trafficked because he is now trapped in a cell in a sex dungeon. So it was also like sex under false pretenses, accusing someone of pedophilia, all sorts of gray stuff where all of this is icky, everything is bad, but no one's directly assaulted. But it's a story about power. It's a story about how easily that power is taken away. And you go into those stories knowing that things are going to be bad. She's messy, and that's the point. The same thing goes for the second story. This is a story about a man who destroys his relationship with his husband and loses all of his moral grounding because his sexual desire for his husband's cancer and his weird kink overshadow his husband's safety and happiness. And he is manipulated to kill himself slowly for this man's sexual gratification. It's real icky, but the story is about that. If you were representing an SA survivor, the story requires their experience. If we're including it, then we are including a character that has experienced it, and it might not be completely about the plot. Where we get to exploitation is when the victimhood of a character is solely to motivate a main character in a way where it's not necessary, and the character doesn't sit and grapple with what just happened, but it's also about like the agency of the character involved. So it's one thing to say, here's this plot about a man whose son was sexually abused and him having to grapple with the grief knowing that a horrible thing happened to his child and having to come to grips with having that grief for himself and not letting it overshadow the grieving process of their death. And then there's another secret worst thing. Bailey, being the victim of a pedophile, sits at the back burner this entire time, even though his death is the catalyst for all of this. Jinx's attractiveness to Ashley doesn't get challenged. He also doesn't really sit with any disgust about the fact that he was lusting after his child's rapist this whole time. Obviously, Bailey can't have agency because Bailey is dead, but he also doesn't get the same screen time or development as characters that are literally in short stories that have no bearing on the plot. The status of him being a victim of sexual violence doesn't matter for the plot if you really think about it, because they don't sit with the implications of what happened. It's just at the back burner. If this had just been about Bailey being murdered, nothing would really change. So when we get to the question of whether or not either topic or any of this was well handled, I would say it wasn't. It's cheap shock value. Jinx taunts Ashley with the details of the abuse and even questions whether or not Ashley would enjoy hearing about it. The narrative doesn't require Ashley to come to terms with Bailey's death or what happened to him. These details are necessary, but the plot doesn't want to engage with it at all. There's a great tragedy about Bailey's lack of agency. This is a child who was brutally abused and murdered. We don't even get the dignity of having an understanding at least of his abuser because the abuser is poorly written. I don't give a shit if Ashley loves Bailey because whatever. But we as the audience don't get the chance to love Bailey. We don't get to feel the weight of his death. And that is supposed to be the core driver of this plot. This is claimed to be a novel about grief, but we see melodrama that I don't think is necessarily grief so much as it is just generally being a shitty person. What makes it worse is that Bailey gets almost re-victimized by this plot because at the end of all of this, when they're ascribing his sexuality and gender identities, these are adults applying adult language to a child. Just because a child plays dress up does not mean they are one thing or the other. Sure, is it non-traditional? Yeah. We already get told early on that Pema okay with it and wanted Bailey to explore things, but just because you're exploring doesn't mean you've already hit your destination. And I really hate that we tend to do things like this, like we apply this adult understanding to small children. This is an issue in a lot of situations where people might be too accepting of a child questioning things, where they feel like, yeah, this is the answer, when personally from experience, it is more important that your family lets you have the space to come to your own conclusions and to be there when that conclusion changes. They are not there to use their idea of your identity to have this vicarious therapy session about their own issues. Their understanding of what they think his identity was is just this way to give this comforting veneer of having understood this dead child when neither of them did. He's a prop, just like the ghost of Pema is, or like Detective Claude or Norman Restorick. I think that if they were going to do anything, they could have just kept the gay part, and I don't think that throwing in the trans part did anything for anyone, especially the plot. I don't think that there's nearly as much of a need for that parallel as LaRocca might have felt. This also isn't a criticism of the I always knew narrative, because I do know people in my personal life where that narrative is true for them. So I'm not going to say oh, they're playing into a myth, Bailey couldn't have known because blah, 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 whatever. But rather from my experience of feeling pressured to have a curated language to help people who weren't in my best interest understand me, I lost understanding of myself because I didn't give myself room to keep asking questions. I think that this is harmful and reveals possibly some biases that LaRocca has. Gender nonconforming behavior does not necessarily mean trans identity. Sometimes clothes are just clothes.
Guys, it's Editing Ambrose. So I stumbled upon an article interviewing LaRocca for Writer's Digest, in which he said some things that I've got some problems with. And 2, I live under a rock, and between recording this video and finishing these edits, I discovered what the plotline of I Saw the TV Glow was. LaRocca, my guy, you wanted this so bad to be I Saw the TV Glow, and it's not. I'm sorry, but you need to get a new agent. Knowing that your agent agreed with you when you said that it was a better idea to not make the story of Victor and Tandy be a full novel and to just shoehorn it into this one, I'm sorry. You and the agent need to get bigger balls, because that was way more interesting than the book you put out. I'm being mean in your interest right now. Just commit, because this half in, half out shit is not working for you, bestie. It's not. And okay, so this part in the article was a big enough quote that they made a graphic for it. LaRocca said, "Empathy is more important than holding a character accountable for their actions. The author needs to understand their character and not look down on them." I'm sorry, maybe I'm a jaded ex-English major who read Nabokov and loved it, but you are wrong. You are so wrong. 1, yes, you do need empathy. You absolutely need empathy. You need to write a little freak and understand them as you're judging them. You have to understand what makes them tick. However, the idea that you need to be opposed to holding them accountable is what killed this book, okay? Not only do you need to hold your character accountable, what that actually means is challenging your character, pushing them, making whatever it is that's going on in their head actually encounter some conflict. I know, scary. This is damning evidence of where LaRocca's mind was at when he was writing this book, because holy shit, everyone understands why Ashley was a sopping wet rag. Unfortunately, no one is going to be empathetic towards your character as much as you are going to be. In general, that is true of all characters, but especially if you're going to write them poorly. I'm sorry, I spent most of my time looking down on these characters that I cognitively understood, and I'm spending most of my time right now looking down on LaRocca. Come on. Ugh. Anyway, this article is everything that I thought was true about this book. I feel affirmed. I feel recognized. Really, long story short, all I need to say here is to all the people watching, if you're a writer, whatever it is that you do in your life, if you think that you are doing enough of whatever it is, you need to be doing more. If you're writing a dark character and you think you wrote them dark enough, think again. Write darker. Just do it, because you can always take stuff away later in the edits. But holy mother of God, after learning that the story of Victor and Tandy was always meant to be shoehorned in just because LaRocca and his agent thought that it wouldn't be suitable for a novel, I'm pissed off for the story. If you're going to write in the interest of just readers and not for yourself, and decide that you're going to take precautionary measures when you claim that you write extreme, dark, subversive horror, then what? You can't claim that you write extreme, dark, subversive horror and then openly admit to pussying out. I'm sorry, you don't write extreme fiction, you write cautious fiction that has some subversive flavoring, because frankly, there are so many things out there that do way more than this. You don't get to say that. You don't get to say your shit is extreme. I'm sorry. I don't give a fuck. You just told me you're a coward. Anyway.
It's the moment you've all been waiting for, the final verdict. I'm giving this one 2 stars, otherwise known as our certified stinker category. This book had some interesting ideas that were ruined by the worst bout of fumbling I have ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of fumbling. done a lot of fumbling. This book felt so self-important and pretentious that it was an insult to my intelligence. I don't just need subtlety in a book, I want it. And if a book is going to sound that self-important, then it better be as sophisticated as it thinks it is. The certified stinker category is reserved for books that I believe were undeniably bad, but were bad in a way that was educational to me. I have hope that even if Laraka's prose remains as melodramatic and honestly annoying as it is now, that in future titles, Laraka will have a better grip on structuring a novel and pacing out the scenes. That's about it for this review. Thank you so much if you got this far. This is the first of many videos to come. My goal is to upload every 3 to 4 weeks or so with a new book deep dive. Our next video will be on The Men by Sandra Newman, which, if you don't know, that one was also a dumpster fire, but for very different reasons. Finally, if you've made it all the way to the end, please comment a book recommendation, your thoughts on this nightmare of a book, or which of my cats you would vote for in a presidential election. Of course, remember to like this video, and most important of all, bury the subscribe button for 30 minutes to change its outlook on my channel forever. Or else.